Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of our study circle in which we have begun this small series in Ramadan, and it is entitled as Moral Lessons from the Quran. So today, as has been the custom in the previous days, we'll be selecting a portion or a passage from the Quran. And the passage which I have selected today is actually a single verse, and this is the famous, the bir verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is verse 177. So I'm just going to read out the text and translation before you first. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. Loyalty to God does not merely mean that you face the east or the west in the prayer. But loyalty is the loyalty of those who believe in God with all their heart, and in the last day, and in the angels of God, and in His books, and in His prophets, and who, in spite of their love for wealth, spend it on kinsfolk, the orphans, the destitute, the traveler, and those who ask, and for the liberation of necks, and who are diligent in the prayer and pay zakat. And loyalty is the loyalty of those who, when make a promise, fulfill it, and especially of those who are steadfast in scarcity, illness, and in times of war. These are the people who are truthful, who are truthful to God in fulfilling the promise of loyalty to them. And these are the ones who are in fact God conscious. So this verse, as you can see, has a certain background, and this is indicated by the fact that the Jews and the Christians were earlier on discussed in this surah, regarding the direction of the Qibla they would face. So one of them would insist on the eastern direction and the other one on the western direction. And they would make this really a point of strong debate and discussion. And they would stress this so much that they would at times leave aside the essence of the prayer itself. And not only the essence, but also the fact that the prayer is basically one's connection with God. So this verse actually cautions and prods the people of the book of those times who were in conflict with each other, and they were constantly arguing whether the Qibla is the direction, the Qibla in which they should be facing it is the eastern direction or the western direction. And the Quran here actually says that if you are loyal to God, then this loyalty, the essence of this loyalty is not facing God in a particular direction, because that is something which is a stipulated thing, and if you keep on nitpicking and fighting on this, there's going to be nothing good which is going to come out of it. So it says that loyalty is the loyalty of those who believe in God with all their heart. It says, the Arabic words are وَلَكِنْ الْبِرَّ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةِ وَالْكِتَابِ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ. So the ingredients of faith in which people should profess faith in are enumerated. First of them is belief in God, and then we have belief in the hereafter, belief in the angels, belief in the books of God, and belief in His prophets. But the first thing, as you can see, is belief in God, and which is a natural consequence of that belief in God is obviously belief in the last day. So the verse here stresses that the essence of faith has to be understood, and that essence of faith, which of course is termed as loyalty or bir in the Arabic language, that bir in the Arabic language tells us is that the real issue at hand is that you have to profess faith in God with all our heart, with all our mind, and all our soul. And believing in God should not just be an inherited trait that normally people who are born as Muslims, they end up believing in God just because they think that their parents have told them to do so. Belief in God should in fact be a self-discovery. It should be a process in which each one of us should try to rediscover God. We know that, of course, that God is someone who exists in our intuition. There are so many signs of God outside of our being, as well as one of the greatest signs being our conscious, which is the conscience which is inside of us, and we must embark upon a conscious discovery of God. Only then will we have a very strong God connection, and only then we will feel that we are connected to someone who takes care of us, who is a living, and we have a living relationship with that God. Otherwise, our relationship would be more mechanical and it will be more inherited than discovered. So, this process of rediscovering God, or at least being conscious of the fact that why do we believe that there is a God and what makes us so close to God. So, that is something which is of essential importance. And the obvious consequence of this is that you have to believe in the last day, because if God has created this earth with a purpose, and that purpose is that if people have been blessed with favors or if people have been deprived of them, then there has to be some justice and accountability. And the day of judgment ensures that. And then we have the other ingredients of faith, like faith in the angels, faith in the books of God, and faith in all the prophets of God. So the Quran is absolutely clear and distinct that we must not differentiate between prophets of God. At other instances, we have verses like "La nufarriqu bayna ahadim min rusulihi," which means that we do not discriminate between messengers of God. We believe in all of them, and we believe in all the books of God, all divine books of God, regardless. And as a corollary of this, obviously, it should not be a blind faith. And this obviously entails that we have to read those books of God as well, try to understand them and collate them and compare them with the last word of God. And as I've repeatedly said this before, that a lot of things are common with the Quran, although even the previous books, they don't exist in their original language, they exist as translations, but still there is a large part of those books which is in conformity with the Quran, and you'll find them even providing some more details. So this is an obvious given that we must read previous scriptures as much as we can, and they have to be read in tandem with the Quran. And the Quran is the muhaymin, as the Quran itself calls itself, which is the arbitrator between right and wrong. And if there is anything amiss between the previous scriptures, then the word of the Quran would be considered as final. But as I said, it is essential that just as we read the Quran and we get this opportunity in Ramadan especially, we must also make an effort to read the previous scriptures as best as we can. So this is how the verse has actually started off, by saying that the essence of loyalty is in this. And then after this belief, we see that there are some other elements which are mentioned in this verse, and they are related to one's rights or one's obligations towards the society. And the words are وَآتَ الْمَالَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ ذَوِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ وَابْنَ السَّبِيلِ. That in spite of their love for wealth, which of course means that the need for wealth that they have, that does not stop them from spending their wealth on kinsfolk, the orphan, the destitute, the traveler, and on those who ask. Wasa'ilin is the Arabic word, and for the liberation of necks. So this is an important point which the Quran has often made at other instances as well, that believers or people who are loyal to God, one of the things which tests their loyalty is that yes, they are in need of the wealth that they have. They have a lot of expenses to meet, but at the same time, in spite of this need, in spite of this love for wealth, they spend on their kinsfolk, they spend on the destitute, they spend on the travelers. We must remember that in the times of the Prophet, people who used to travel were in a real bad shape, because mostly traveling would be dependent on a city's hospitality, how the travelers would be treated, because there were no, at times, permanent places where they could be housed or hosted. So in many cases, they were left at the mercy of the people who were in the new city that a person would be traveling to. And then it says for the liberation of necks. So slavery was something which was rampant in the Arab society of those times. And the Quran says that such is their loyalty, such is the loyal nature of these believers, that what they do is that they spend on liberating necks. And this, of course, is that they buy slaves and set them free. They emancipate slaves and set them free. And this has been termed as a huge virtue in the earlier surah of the Quran. Thus, for example, it is said that fakku rakaba, that it has a huge appeal in expressing this fact that such are these believers, such is their loyalty towards God, that they would like to spend, and not only spend for the destitute, for the needy, and for the traveler, but also to buy these slaves and set them free, which we know that were inherited by Islam when the Quran was being revealed. Next, we have two more traits, and these traits are related to worship rituals. So the words are وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَ الزَّكَاةَ, and this loyalty, of course, has another aspect to it, and that is that they are diligent in the prayer and they also pay zakat. So of course, diligence in one's prayer is something which is a given. We have to understand that the greatest way to connect ourselves with God is standing in prayer before Him. And this standing in prayer before the Almighty has to be with all our attention, with all our focus. We have to realize that as far as our attention towards the Almighty is concerned, it has to be uninterrupted as far as possible, focusing ourselves, our attention, that we are standing before the Lord of the heavens and the earth. One of the things which is very useful in concentration is that we know what we are actually reciting in the prayer. So whatever surah we are reciting and the rest of the utterances of the prayer, we must know their meaning. This is something which always makes us realize what we are actually speaking and conversing with God, because this is like a conversation that we do with God. And if we are able to pay attention to what we are actually speaking or conversing, it goes a long way in making our attention more focused, and we are able to derive the maximum benefit from the prayer in this way. And then it says that they are ones who are diligent in paying zakat as well. And this is an area that we have to be very careful as well. But because on most occasions, what we do is we calculate our zakat in a rough way and we think that it has been paid. But a more careful attitude in this regard should be that we should try to calculate the exact amount of zakat which is due on us, and we must dispense with it on a very regular basis, instead of just leaving it to estimation and a rough amount that we might have in mind, that this is how I should pay my zakat. No, it should be more precise, and this precision is something which is also helpful in the fact that at times you might be calculating in a way that we would be giving a lesser amount than what is due, and at other times it would be more than what is due. So what is more can always be used as a buffer for future zakat, and what is less, of course, is something that will make us realize that this is something that we must never fail and be up to the mark. So these are the two worship rituals which are especially mentioned in this very profound verse. And the verse then continues and says, "Wal-mufuna bi-ahdihim iza ahadu," that such is the loyalty of these people, that when they make a promise, they fulfill it. When they make a promise, they fulfill it. They don't back away. Giving their word is of supreme importance to them. They know that they'll be held accountable before the Almighty on the Day of Judgment, and obviously before the person also with whom we had made a commitment. So we have to be extremely careful in making commitments, and we should not make commitments that we cannot honor. We have to be extremely diligent that when we make a commitment, it must be fulfilled at the time that we have committed. And if there is some emergency, or if there is some problem or there's some delay, then obviously we have to inform the person either before time or immediately after time, and apologize for any inconvenience, and also try to make up for any damages that might have resulted because of a promise being broken. So we have to remember this. The promise is something which is of utmost importance. In fact, the Quran is called our religion to be a misaq. Misaq means a covenant. So it's a promise or a covenant or an agreement between God and His creatures. So when we fulfill the Sharia, when we fulfill our religion, follow the dictates of our religion, we are actually fulfilling that covenant or that agreement, which in fact is a promise that we have made with the Almighty. And then the verse now ends with another very important note, and which is that وَالصَّابِرِينَ فِي الْبَأْسَاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَحِينَ الْبَأْسِ, and that they are steadfast. And this is a very important area that we need to understand, that the Quran says that in times of scarcity, whenever the funds are scarce or food supplies are scarce, anything which relates to deprivation, they show perseverance and steadfastness, and in times of illness as well, and in times of war. So we can clearly see that there are three very testing times. One of them is when we are faced with scarcity, and then when we are faced with illness, and when we are faced in a war situation, when we know that supplies that they just go blank. So what is said here is that believers, they are extremely steadfast, they persevere, they don't lose hope, they don't give up, and they are rock solid in these situations. It's extremely difficult to persevere in times of illness. It's extremely difficult when war is ensuing in our country, and we can just imagine, for example, today what's going on in war-torn countries like Ukraine, for example, who has been recently invaded by Russia, and how the situation there is, how the human rights situation there is disgustfully developing. And we can only imagine the plight of the people who have laid down their lives, or who have survived in the form of wounded people or severely injured people. So again, this is an area in which the Quran tells us that we have to show steadfastness, because this steadfastness actually shows that we have taken this life to be a challenge, to be a test. And testing times are illness, they are times of war, and they are times of scarcity. So all these three times, they really test our mettle, and we have to prove ourselves worthy to this challenge. And finally, we have the verse ending that on the words "Ulaika allazina sadaqu." Quran actually tells us that these are the people who are truthful to God in fulfilling the promise of loyalty to them. So the verse started off, remember, with the word bir. In Arabic, the word bir means loyalty. So after enumerating all these traits and qualities of believers, the verse ends on these words that "Ulaika allazina sadaqu," that these are the people who are truthful in their claim that they are really loyal to God. So if this loyalty has to be understood, this loyalty is not the name of debating with each other regarding whether we have to face the east or the west in the prayer, because that is a debate which is going to go to nowhere. In fact, loyalty is something which is represented by some qualities. There are qualities of faith, there are qualities of your practices, there are qualities of your deeds, and there are qualities of our worship rituals. So the Quran says people who are able to fulfill them, they are the ones who are truthful in their promise towards God's loyalty. And the last of these words of this verse are "Ulaika humul muttaqun." They are the ones who are God conscious. They are the ones who have taqwa. They have piety. They are the ones who are really people who would be in their proper frame of mind, called as really God conscious people who would fear God, and not only fear God, but at the same time they would also be ones who would hold themselves accountable before God, because the greatest manifestation of God consciousness is to regard ourselves to be accountable before God. And the month of Ramadan, in which we are passing these days, is a wonderful lesson that teaches us this accountability. So remember, when we are fasting, in spite of the fact that we might have access to food when no one is looking, and all kinds of people who might be very, very evil in their normal life, when they even fast, they have this element of fear in them that if no one is watching them, God is watching them. They just cannot eat or drink in seclusion, thinking that there's no one seeing them. They also exhibit this God consciousness, which shows that how important this is, and how important God, this holy month of Ramadan teaches us that we have to show this resilience, and we have to think that just as we are not going to eat in this in our fast, even when someone is not seeing us, so in our other deeds, we have to realize, which we do in private or in public or in a place where no one sees them, then they are actually being watched by God, even if no one else is seeing. So this is one of the greatest lessons which fasting gives us, and which makes us God conscious, as this verse has just said. So I'll end my talk here, and now I'm available for your questions.
Thank you so much for another enlightening talk, Dr. Shehzad. For questions, I have Fatma. Fatma, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum. I have two short questions. I want to ask that is it true that with one wuzu you cannot offer 3 prayers in a row even if you don't do anything which breaks your wuzu? And also that is it true that after doing wuzu you cannot like wipe the water off your body with a towel?
Both are not true. Both are common misconceptions. As long as your wuzu is intact, you can do as many prayers or offer as many prayers as is possible. So this is not correct that a certain number of prayers, like 3, as you said, are the ones which can only be offered by a single wuzu. So as long as the wuzu is intact, you can offer any number of prayers that come in that time. And also, this is not correct that you cannot wipe the water once you have done wuzu. It's perfectly okay to wipe the water because the purpose of the wuzu is to go through that ritual in which you are going to just soak your body or certain body parts with water. And once that is done, it is entirely up to your own discretion whether you wipe it off or you just leave it as it is.
Qureshi, you can go next.
So, Dr. Shah, in this ayah where it says about spending on the qurba and yatama and masakin, but then later in the ayah also talks about wa'at zakah. So, does it treat giving zakat as something different than spending on all of these heads?
No, actually, this is just, they are two independent things. They are not mutually exclusive. They don't exclude each other. When the word zakat is used, obviously it means that they spend on all types of needy. And these needy could be their kinfolk, they could be their destitute people, or the people who ask. And so spending is something which is mentioned in the background, that in spite of being in need of wealth, they don't withhold their wealth. And whenever someone needy, like their own kinsfolk or any other person comes along, they spend on them. And when zakat is mentioned separately, of course, it is that obligatory part of the ritual which is being mentioned. So first, charity was mentioned, which was a general directive, which includes sadaqat, and later on, the obligatory rituals, which of course include the prayer and the zakat, were mentioned separately, just to pinpoint the fact that giving in charity, in spite of being needy of it, needy of the wealth, if you spend on such and such people, is something which is extremely a noble gesture. But as far as zakat is concerned, this should not be the case that you don't pay that. So zakat is the minimum amount of charity that you have to give. So it's like mentioning both of them side by side. The first was mentioned in the form of an appeal because it's not obligatory, and the second was mentioned in the form of an explicit directive because it is mandatory.
Yeah, but the first thing that is mentioned is all of them are valid places where you can spend your zakat, right?
Right, at the same time. So they are the same thing, because you see, when it says وَآتَ الْمَالَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ, what is being stressed here is that in spite of being in need of this wealth, they don't withhold charity, general charity, and they spend abundantly on those who need. So that's a form of a trait. I mean, this is something which is over and above what is mandatory. But later on, it is also said that when they do this, which is over and above their mandatory amount, it doesn't mean that they're overlooking the mandatory part as well. There, of course, are people who also spend in zakat. And the heads of zakat have already been spelled out in Surah Tawbah, verse 60. And so therefore, there's no need to repeat them here.
Rafia Khwaja, you can unmute yourself now.
Islamic Dr. Shehzad. Dr. Shehzad, I have two questions. I heard your views on the end of slavery. I just have one question. These female slaves that were made, was it not possible to send them back to their own country once the war was over?
You see, what we are overlooking is the fact is that when Islam inherited them, they were already there. Wars had already taken place, and people had already become part and parcel of the houses that they were there, and they had to be set free in a way in which this deeply ingrained institution had to be, gradually dispensed with, because sending them back was not a possibility. Because one, they had been bought by people, so they had to be someone who should buy them and set them free. So what the Quran did was it actually made an appeal. And as a result of that appeal, many of these slaves, they were brought and set free. This is an even better alternative than sending them back to their original owners. So better alternative was adopted, and this appeal was made, and people spent their money, and they bought those slave women or slave men from their owners, and they just set them free. So I think a much better alternative was adopted.
And also, Dr. Shehzad, slavery ended by the Europeans and the British in the 60s. Isn't that correct?
Yes, this ended in the last century, somewhere in the last century.
Okay. And the second question I want to ask, since slavery was totally abolished, is wife beating valid now? Is that also abolished?
These are two entirely different things, and they don't have any connection. Slavery is something which was meant to be abolished. It was abolished in due time. Wife beating or punishing the wife is part of the Islamic Sharia, and I have explained it a number of times, the conditions, the stipulations, and the occasion where this right can or should be exercised. It is nothing which has been abrogated in this regard.
But Shehzad, isn't it regarded like slavery is totally regarded as immoral today? Wife beating is regarded as immoral today, regardless of whether it's a light touch or a hard slap.
I think I've explained this a number of times, and let me just briefly once again reiterate. You see, we need to understand that we are living in two distinct societies even today. One is this rural or tribal society, which is still found in many countries, and we have this urban society in which most of us are living. So, of course, we just cannot imagine this to take place in an urban society, and urbanization has made it virtually impossible. So, as I have discussed this on other occasions, that first of all, this is something which is never an obligation, it is never to be adopted if it is going to be counterproductive, which in urban societies, it is going to be mostly counterproductive. But in rural societies or in tribal societies, even in the times of the Prophet, this did have a role in trying to stop the family from breaking. So we need to understand that this wife, where the Almighty is coming from when He gives this permission to punish or chastise the wife, that basically the institution of the family in which a wife stands up to the authority of the husband and tries to dismember this institution, the Almighty has given an alternative or a procedure in which this could be stopped as far as possible. And it has been laid down in that procedure that finally, if you think that you can stop that divorce or stop the family from breaking up by punishing your wife, then that should be adopted. But as I said, it is an option. It is again something which might work. It did work in the times of the Prophet in the tribal societies. It might still work, and I think it does work in tribal societies that exist today and rural societies, because many rural societies are very close to certain tribal societies. But I would not imagine this to be working in urban societies. So actually, we have to exercise our prudence in using this directive on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have to understand it that this is a last-ditch effort to save the family unit from dismembering. So family is of utmost importance to remain intact as far as possible. So whenever this situation arises that a family is on the brink of dismemberment, if this measure can contribute in stopping that dismemberment, a husband has been given this option. But if, for example, husbands start to misuse this authority in certain ways, as has taken place in several societies, they can be taken to task. They can even be punished for this, because if they are misusing authority, any misuse of authority can always be checked by a court of law.
But Shehzad, it's rampant in the rural society and we can't stop it.
As I said, if it is a means of stopping divorce or the family institution to get dismembered or disintegrate, this is an option which is being given. If people are using this option prudently or not using it, it's fine. But if they are misusing it, you should not blame the law. You should blame the implementation of the law. I mean, the divine law is giving you this right, just as it is giving you several other rights. But if people start to abuse the law, then this is not the fault of the law. This is basically a fault of the people who implement that law. So I think instead of criticizing the law, we need to criticize people who are not implementing the law in its spirit.
Samra Harun, you can go now.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. So my question is My question is regarding sadaqah. Is it okay to give sadaqah on my own? Like my husband does pay, alhamdulillah, a lot of sadaqah back home in Pakistan, different orphanages and etc. But I'm inclined to give some money, sadaqah money, to different institutes like which are working in the propagation of Islam, or educating people and all. Here also Islamic institutes, but he is of the opinion that orphanages and masakin are more they deserve it more. So I still feel, I really strongly feel that I should be giving some money here. So is it okay without his knowledge if I give some money, some sadaqah money? I won't be stealing it from him or anything, but like without his knowledge.
It depends. Does the money belong to him, or is it a common pool that from which you're spending?
Yeah, it would be a common pool. I don't work, but I have cards on my own.
If there is this understanding that you have a right to spend, the way you would like to, I see no problem. But for example, if the money is such that there is an understanding between you and your husband that the charity would be spent in a certain way, whether it's right or wrong, that's another thing. But if there is an agreement, then I think he should be informed, and you should just tell him that you feel like spending on institutions as well. But if either if it belongs to you in any way, for example, if you are the owner of that money, or if there is this common spending authority which is given to you, in that case, I don't think you need to inform him. So it all depends on the nature of understanding that you have with your husband in this matter.
Okay. There's no such like understanding or anything, but we always send our zakat to Pakistan, and now recently sadaqah as well. I did once give some money to an institute, and when it came in the in the bill later on from the credit card, he just spoke to me that I think it's better that we spend it on people who don't have enough to eat and all those things, because these institutes spend it on their administrative stuff. So
I think in this situation, it is best that you clarify this and have a discussion with him. Especially, you should have a discussion if the money belongs to both of you, and you can just say, well, I'm paying my part of the money, or my share of the money. But if the money belongs solely to your husband, then obviously seeking his permission is essential, because he owns the money. So it depends on who owns the money. If you own the money, you don't need to ask him. But if there is a understanding that wherever the money would be spent, it would be spent after mutual consultation, then again. So the bottom line is that the nature of that understanding is important. And if there is an absence of that understanding, then the best thing would be that you just discuss this issue once again with him, so that you can once and for all rest assured that what exactly are your rights in this case.
Yeah, because I do spend, like, I have no restrictions on spending. I do spend on my clothes, shopping, etc. I don't have to ask him or inform him beforehand for that. So I do tell him that I bought this stuff or everything, but
so another thing that you can do this Ramadan is that you spend on institutions, and let's see what his reaction is when he sees the credit card bill. And if he is okay with it, I think it's fine. Otherwise, you can at that time say that, well, you feel more comfortable, or one of the expenses that you feel comfortable is that you won't like to give to institutions as well, because they're also doing some service.
Yeah,
so
I
this will be one.
Okay, thank you so much. I will try that. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you. Dania, you can go ahead now.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, that's great. Sir, I just have an observation of my society that usually we prefer to help a lot of people. Help is not only in terms of money, but in terms of energy, in terms of time. We want to help a lot of people and to make an impact in the society at a massive level. So my question from you is that whether helping few with more things, I mean more financial help or energy related help or time related help is better, or helping a lot of people is better? I mean, which one is more impactful, and which mainly creates a massive or major influence in a society?
I
Which
think
thing is better?
there is no rule of thumb in this regard. It should be done on a case-to-case basis. At times, spending more on lesser people is more impactful, and at other times, the opposite is the more impactful. I think you should pick and choose, and there is no such thing as an absolute superiority of a certain mode of spending. So it all depends on the circumstances, the need, the people, the area. So there are so many things. So you can exercise your own discretion and try to do what is more impactful. So this is entirely your prerogative.
All right. Sir, I have another question from you, is that I have recently been encountered with a situation that a person has showed an intention to help someone, but later on they have supported some other person and with the money, and that they have kept for the first one, and then they have shared that they found the second person more deserving comparatively, but apparently it's up to them that whether they want to help the first one or the second one. But my question is that what if they have made a commitment with the first person that they would be going to help that person, but they didn't? So, what should be done if any of the situation arises later on?
Well, preferably, of course, if the commitment has been made, it should be honored. But again, there is an exception, because once you make a commitment, it's not a commitment of a normal sort. It's a commitment of helping someone. So there could be an issue or a situation in which you make this commitment and suddenly another scenario arises and there is someone even more deserving or more needy, and you feel like telling that person that, well, I did make this commitment, but I am sorry, I have to break it off because I found someone who is even more deserving, and there is a emergency in this regard, or anything which might appear to be more worthy of that spending. So in normal circumstances, you should try to honor the commitment, but there could be exceptions, as I just said, and such exceptions in which you are trying to help someone out who might be facing a very grave situation, and then you tell that person that, well, next time I'll try and help you out. Or of course, other things can also be thought of, that, for example, you can ask your friends around or other people who might be interested, that, well, this is how things have shaped up, and there are two people at the same time who need to be supported. So there are several options that could arise, but it's not absolutely, it's not the same commitment that we make in situations. Yes, if the commitment made is of such nature that what we have committed to that person, and that person has maybe committed further down regarding some of his needs. For example, if you said that, well, I'm going to pay for the fee of your child, and that person has got admitted his child and he is already in there, and now a situation is such that he or she just cannot reverse that, then unless such a reverse situation is there, I think we can have certain exceptions, and those exceptions are so blatant that whenever you think of them, you immediately realize, well, yes, this exception is absolutely justified.
All right, thank you, sir.
Shehzad, I have a written question here. Regarding the protection of chastity, a lot of religious people have the opinion that both genders cannot interact unless extremely important, for example, in educational or corporate institutions. There should be boundaries, of course, but is that exactly so?
Well, what happens is that the Quran tells us that because of this natural attraction between opposite genders, there's always this chance that things might cross limits. So it's always best that if you have to interact with the opposite gender, it should be on because of some purpose. For example, if you're a student, it could be some assignment, some project. If you are in an office, it has to be work related. So if any meaningful interaction is the purpose, then there should be no problem. However, if the interaction is of the nature of friendship, in which you are just indulging in small talk or loose talk, or just hanging out without any purpose, that is something I think where the boundaries have to be kept in mind. Otherwise, any I use the word meaningful to explain this, that any meaningful interaction which would actually signal the fact that particular purpose is more focused on instead of personal exchange. So when an external purpose becomes more important between two genders, so they focus more on that purpose. I just pointed out, like a project or an assignment or some homework, or it could be anything. So the stress would be on that particular project. But other than that, yes, the Prophet himself has actually cautioned us and said that meeting, if a boy and a girl or a man or a woman meets in private, then this could lead towards untoward situations. And he is reported to have said that iyyakum wad-dukhul an-nisa, that you should refrain from meeting women in private, because this is something that you might not realize how it can badly affect your inner purity, and also change people's perceptions, and also at times lead to certain extremes.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Alil Qureshi can ask you a question now.
Yeah, Doctor, I've seen sometimes most of these institutions that are accepting charities or zakat, they do have two different categories, that something is zakat applicable or eligible, and these kinds of donations are not zakat eligible. And I think I've heard some fatwa somewhere where if you're paying zakat to an institution which you don't know that who is the person or the deserved person or needy person who would be receiving that, then this may not be the best use of your zakat money. What's the actual situation around that?
These are just man-made restrictions. You have to exercise your common sense, your wisdom, in trying to find out whether if you'd like to help an institution, then obviously the institution is the recipient, and regardless of where the money is spent, it is spent for the cause of the institution. And if it's just to be given to an individual, of course, then that's another thing. So it's basically a call that you have to make. There is no such condition which has been imposed by the Sharia that you need to follow or obey. It is your own prerogative, your own discretion. And you have the choice, as someone just asked, you can give it to individuals directly, or you can give it to institutions. So it all depends on where would you like to dispense your zakat.
Thank you. Dr. Shehzad, that's the end of the question lineup today.
Okay, inshallah, we'll see each other tomorrow. Until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.